Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. Do you remember what it felt like to meet someone through a friend, not a screen? How did your heart race when someone leaned in, grinned, and said, "I know someone you'd like"? Do you recall the nervous energy, that mix of hope and uncertainty, before even knowing their name? There were no photos, no digital hints, just a name, a nod, and a promise that something special might happen. Stay with me until the end of this video to feel that kind of anticipation again, to revisit the kind of night that could only happen once, and could only happen back then. It was 1996, early spring. I remember it clearly, not because anything extravagant happened that day, but because of how simple everything felt. I was still living in that modest two-bedroom apartment on Elmwood Drive, the one with the squeaky floorboard right before the hallway. I had a lava lamp glowing purple in my room, and the faint hum of the VCR often filled the living room late at night when the world outside got quiet. Those were the days when you waited a whole week to see the next episode of Friends, and Pizza Hut still had that red roof and book it, stickers on the window. That Saturday started like most others. I was sitting on the carpeted floor of Jason's place, thumbing through a stack of CDs, Third Eye Blind, The Cranberries, Alanis Morissette. He was scrolling through a binder of PlayStation demo discs when he suddenly paused. I should have noticed that smirk coming. Jason always had this way of teeing things up without warning. "You know," he said casually, not looking up, "I know someone you'd like." Do you remember how your stomach would twist a little when a friend said that? That second of silence when your brain raced, trying to picture a face you'd never seen, to anticipate a voice you'd never heard. Back then, you couldn't search for them, couldn't scroll through carefully curated pictures, couldn't analyze bios or posts. All you had was the tone in your friend's voice and the flutter of curiosity in your chest. I felt it then. That flutter, I played it cool, or tried to. "Oh yeah?" I said, pretending to be more interested in the disc of twisted metal than in what he'd just said. He nodded. "Her name's Natalie. She's from my art history class. Funny, kind of sarcastic. The kind you'd probably argue with in a good way. I don't know, man. She just reminded me of you." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I remember how my palms started to sweat. You see, when someone says they know, a person who'd be perfect for you, it hits differently. Because they're not suggesting a name from a list, not pointing to an algorithm. They're offering a piece of their judgment, their trust. Back then, all we had was trust. Jason didn't push. That's another thing I remember about those days. Friends didn't pester you to meet someone. They just floated the idea like a cassette tape left on your desk. You could play it when you were ready. That night, I lay on my bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck on the ceiling years ago. I kept thinking about Natalie, not because I knew what she looked like, but because I didn't. That mystery made it all more electric. My mind filled in the blanks, shaped by the music playing low from my boombox. Do you remember what it was? Like to imagine someone based only on a name and a few words? For 2 days, I walked around with this strange sense of excitement. It wasn't like today, where you could just message someone and break the ice in 5 minutes. You had to wait. And in that waiting, the magic brewed. Tuesday rolled around, and Jason finally said, "Hey, Natalie's gonna come with us to Cafe Luna Friday night. Just heads up." Cafe Luna. I hadn't been there in months. It was this quiet, dimly lit spot tucked between an old record store and a laundromat. Red vinyl booths, yellowed menus, jukebox in the corner playing Mazzy Star. The kind of place where time felt soft, like it melted a little slower. The week crawled. My nerves made me question everything. What would I say? What if she didn't? Like me? What if I said something stupid, like quoting Wayne's World out of context? Do you remember rehearsing conversations in your head before meeting someone new? Friday came. I changed my outfit twice, then back again, before settling on my favorite flannel shirt, the green and navy one with the missing button near the cuff. I sprayed a bit of CK1 on my collar and walked to the cafe, trying not to overthink. The moment I stepped inside, I saw her. She was already at the booth with Jason, sipping a Coke from a glass bottle. She had a denim jacket over a faded band, tee, and her hair was tucked behind one ear. She smiled when she saw me, not a big smile, but the kind that said, "I was hoping you'd come." And just like that, the nerves softened. Jason made quick introductions and left us to talk, pretending to be busy with the jukebox. I sat across from her, and the air between us felt warm, not heavy. She talked about art, but not in a pretentious way. She liked movie posters, old ones, the kind you'd find rolled up in a tube in your uncle's garage. We talked about our favorite cereals. Turns out she was a Golden Grahams girl. I was more of a Cinnamon Toast Crunch guy. We laughed about how both of us had taped over family VHS tapes by accident once. She confessed she'd recorded an entire TRL episode over her brother's 8th grade graduation. And somewhere between the second refill of Coke and the last song from the jukebox, I realized something. Do you remember the moment you knew someone could become important to you? I felt it there. Not because she was perfect or because I knew everything about her, but because the conversation felt like breathing. Easy. Honest. There were no swipes, no filters, no profiles to double-check later. Just me, her, and that quiet connection that comes when two people meet without expectation. Only possibility. That's how it was. Meeting someone through a friend was a bit like hearing your favorite song on the radio. Not because you picked it, but because it was meant to find you. So yes, I was nervous. And yes, it felt like standing at the edge of something unknown. But it was the kind of unknown that made life feel wide open. And that night I walked home under the buzz of streetlights, holding the warmth of her smile like a secret in my pocket. Because sometimes the best things happen when someone simply says, "I know someone you'd like." Friday night faded into the soft hum of memory by the time Saturday morning rolled in. I couldn't stop thinking about Natalie. Her laugh still echoed in my head, especially the way it curled at the end like she was trying not to laugh too loud. I kept wondering if she felt the same ease that I did, but of course nothing in the 90s came with immediate confirmation. You didn't get a text or a reaction emoji. You just had to sit with the feeling and let it unfold day by day. Jason called me around noon. His voice was casual, like he wasn't aware that my heart had been doing cartwheels since the night before. "Hey, a bunch of us are heading to the boardwalk later. Natalie's coming too. You in?" I paused. Part of me wanted to say no. Not because I didn't want to see her again, but because I was suddenly aware of how awkward that second meeting might be. The first time we had a booth to ourselves, dim lights, and soda refills that created natural breaks in conversation. This time, we'd be surrounded by friends, laughter, inside jokes, and that unpredictable group energy that sometimes made it hard to even finish a sentence. Still, I said yes. I spent way too long deciding what to wear. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I finally settled on a simple gray hoodie over a white tee and my favorite pair of slightly faded jeans, the ones I'd worn so many times they had a thin patch near the left knee. My Converse were still dusty from the skate park, but I figured that added character. The boardwalk was already buzzing when I got there. You could hear the sound of arcade games from a block away, that mix of muffled 8-bit music, laughter, and the occasional scream from the roller coaster overhead. I saw our group near the food stand, gathered around those green plastic tables that always felt slightly sticky no matter how clean they looked. Natalie was there. She was wearing a yellow windbreaker, and her hair was in a messy ponytail that made her look effortlessly cool. She caught my eye and smiled, a quiet little grin like she remembered everything too. But still, there was that moment of uncertainty, that space between us filled with small fears. Do you remember how awkward it was to meet someone again, right after a good first impression? Do you remember that worry in your chest, the fear of not living up to who you were the night before? We didn't talk right away. That's what made it even more awkward. In a group hangout, there's no clear cue. You can't just walk up and say, "Hi again." You have to navigate the noise, the rhythm of the group, the timing of conversations. I ended up next to her while we waited in line for pretzels. We exchanged glances, both pretending to be focused on the menu above the counter. "So," she said finally, "survived your Coke sugar crash from last night?" I laughed, maybe a little too loud. "Barely. You?" "Still recovering from hearing you say Cinnamon Toast Crunch is better than Golden Grams." Her tone was teasing, light, but it helped break the wall between us. We stood in that line, making small talk about stupid things. Favorite video rental stores? Who had the better Nickelodeon game show? Whether the cheese on nachos at the movie theater actually counted as cheese. It wasn't deep, it wasn't poetic, but it was ours. Later, we all wandered toward the arcade. The group split naturally. Some went for air hockey, others to the claw machine that never gave up the stuffed animals. Jason tried to get us all to play that 4-player racing game, the one with cracked steering wheels and sticky gear shifts, but it was full. Natalie and I ended up near the skee-ball machines, a little to the side where it was quieter. She handed me 2 tokens without asking, and I took them without saying thanks, just nodding. That's the thing about those moments. The comfort starts showing in the silences. We played a few rounds, laughing when the ball flew off the track or barely made it into the 10-point slot. Neither of us was trying to impress the other. We were just there, in the moment, letting it all be weird and light and spontaneous. Do you remember what it felt like to say something dumb, and the other person actually laughed? Not because it was clever, but because they were paying attention. That's what it felt like when I made a joke about being skee-ball champions of the Eastern Seaboard, and she actually laughed with her whole face, crinkling her nose. And then something happened. A lull in the group. Jason and the others wandered off to the other end of the boardwalk, giving us this brief bubble of quiet. We sat on the wooden bench near the railing, facing the ocean. The sky was soft orange now, the kind of sunset that made everything feel a little cinematic. There was that awkward silence again, but it was different this time. Not the kind that needed to be filled, the kind that held space for something real. She asked if I wanted to try one of those instant photo booths. I shrugged and said, "Why not?" We crammed into the little space, the kind with the plastic curtain and the blinking red light above. I remember the smell of the vinyl seat, the hum of the camera, and how we both instinctively leaned in when the flash popped. We didn't pose, we didn't plan. We just looked at each other and smiled. I blinked in the second shot. She stuck her tongue out in the third. By the fourth, we were both laughing too hard to care. The strip of photos slid out slowly, colors slightly off, that chemical smell still fresh. She looked at them, then at me, and handed me the strip without a word. I still have those pictures, somewhere, probably tucked in one of my old photo albums, between a school dance and a trip to the lake. Sometimes I wonder if she kept her copy too. On the walk back, the group reassembled like a puzzle. Laughter picked up again. People talked over each other, made plans for next week, argued about what movie to rent for the next sleepover. I stayed mostly quiet, walking next to her. Our hands never touched, but they came close once or twice, brushing gently like they were testing the idea. Do you remember how electric that first almost touch used to feel? When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep, not because of nerves, but because of how natural everything had felt after the awkwardness passed. Like we'd pushed through a wall and found something waiting on the other side. Meeting someone at a group hangout was clumsy. You weren't the center of attention. You had to share the air, share the space, and navigate the little moments in between. But sometimes, that awkward beginning made the connection feel more real, more earned. Looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. That awkwardness was part of the charm, part of the truth of those nights in the 90s. Nights when you didn't need perfection. Just a little spark, a shared laugh, and the courage to show up and see what might happen. And in that tiny booth with its peeling stickers and red blinking light, something beautiful began, quietly, awkwardly, and completely. By the next weekend, the photo strip from the boardwalk was already pinned to the corkboard above my desk. Every time I glanced at it, I could still hear her laugh echoing in my ears, still feel the slight tension from that first almost touch. But nothing moved fast back then, not the way it does now. There were no sudden declarations, no perfectly edited texts, no curated playlists sent in seconds. There was only time and the slow unfolding of something real. Jason was planning another hangout. This time, it was his backyard, a classic setup, complete with mismatched lawn chairs, a charcoal grill that only halfway worked, and someone's old boombox playing a mixtape that skipped every time someone got too close. Natalie was coming again. That was all I needed to hear. When I arrived, a few people were already there, tossing around a frisbee, laughing way too hard at something probably not that funny. I saw Natalie near the cooler, pretending to argue with Jason over soda flavors. She spotted me, gave me that small grin again, and tilted her head like she was about to say something. But she didn't. She waited. That was her thing. She let you come to her, like she was giving you a choice. So I went. As I walked up, Jason launched into one of his infamous rants about how root beer was an abomination and shouldn't be allowed at group gatherings. I disagreed, obviously, not because I cared that much about root beer, but because I knew where this was going. Seriously, who actually likes this stuff? He said, pulling out a can and holding it up like it was evidence in court. Natalie leaned in just enough to brush my shoulder. He does, she said, pointing at me. Mr. Root Beer Defender. He drinks it like it's a personality trait. I raised an eyebrow. Only because I have taste, unlike certain people who think grape soda is a lifestyle. Jason groaned. Here we go. And just like that, it started. The dance of jokes, pokes, and playful sarcasm. It was subtle, not the kind of flirting that anyone else would call out. But I felt it. I knew every word carried a second meaning, a layer underneath the laughter. She made fun of the way I said bagel, claiming I pronounced it like someone from a cereal commercial. I teased her for holding a can with both hands like she was worried it might fly away. It wasn't about what we were saying. It was how we said it. And more than that, it was how everyone else in the group started catching on. Not in a teasing way, but in that quiet way people do when something's beginning. Later, while we waited for burgers that Jason swore he knew how to grill, a small group of us sat around the picnic table playing that old card game everyone pretended to remember the rules to. Half the time, we were making things up. Natalie and I ended up on the same team, and she leaned over to whisper in my ear every time she had a good play. "Watch this," she said once, sliding a card across with a smirk. "I'm about to break the universe. You mean break the rules," I whispered back. Same thing. That moment, her breath warm near my cheek, her eyes full of mischief, stuck with me. I didn't care that we lost the game. I didn't even care that someone spilled orange soda on my shoe. What mattered was how easy it was to exist near her, the way our jokes built a little world inside the chaos of the group. After dinner, people spread out across the yard. Some were lying on the grass, staring at the stars like they had big dreams and nothing better to do. Others gathered around the boombox, trying to convince it to play one more song without skipping. Natalie and I ended up by the fire pit, even though there wasn't a fire yet, just a pile of wood and a promise. She picked up a marshmallow from the snack table and held it between two fingers. "Do you think people actually like these?" she asked. "Or do they just pretend to because it's part of the ritual?" I took it from her and said, "Definitely pretend, but it's the pretending that makes it fun." She nodded. "That sounds like something you'd say." I smiled. "What's that supposed to mean?" She shrugged, her eyes playful. "Just that you always sound like you're about to say something meaningful, but then it's really just about snacks." We laughed, and then she added, quieter, "It's kind of charming, though." That was the first time she said something that wasn't coded in a joke. It landed softly, without needing to be explained. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, really looked. The way her hair caught the last light of the evening, the curve of her mouth when she wasn't trying to be funny. There was a stillness in that moment that didn't ask for anything more. We stayed close the rest of the night. Nothing dramatic, just sharing a blanket when it got cold, passing chips back and forth, creating new inside jokes on top of the old ones. Like how Jason always managed to burn one burger every single time, or how the boombox had a personal vendetta against track number 6. That's how it went for the next few weeks. Group hangs, shared moments, and a growing list of phrases that made sense only to us, like Team Root Beer or Bagel Emergency or Track 6 Curse. We used those phrases like secret handshakes. A glance across the room, a smirk during a story, and suddenly the ordinary turned special. Do you remember when flirting didn't need grand gestures? When it was just a well-timed comment, a shared look during a dumb game, or a joke that no one else understood. That's how our connection grew. Slowly, sweetly, with charm, not urgency. I didn't know where it was going yet, but I knew I didn't want to rush it. Not when every joke felt like another brick in the path we were building. Not when each laugh made her feel a little closer. By the end of that month, everyone in our circle knew something was happening between us. No one said it out loud, but they saw it, in the way we always sat near each other, in the way we passed messages through sarcasm, in the way our eyes met a second too long when someone else said something dumb. We didn't have to explain ourselves. We were becoming something, quietly, steadily, one inside joke at a time. And honestly, it was the best kind of beginning. Something had shifted. It was subtle, like the way summer slowly turns to fall. You don't notice the exact day it changes, but one morning you wake up and the air feels different. That's how it was between Natalie and me. The inside jokes had multiplied. The lingering glances became part of our rhythm, and the silences we shared were no longer awkward. They were comfortable, even warm. Still, I didn't know much about her beyond the laughs and the late-night group hangs. I didn't know where she worked, what her favorite movie was, or whether she believed in ghosts or just liked pretending during horror marathons. She was a mystery wrapped in sarcasm, and I didn't want to ruin it by diving into her social media like some stalker trying to decode her personality through filtered photos and curated captions. It just didn't feel right. That wasn't our vibe. So I did what people used to do before the age of digital peeking. I asked around. It started innocently. During a game night at Rachel's apartment, I found myself in the kitchen with Jason while everyone else was trying to agree on which board game didn't ruin friendships. "So," I said, casually flipping the cap off a soda bottle. "Natalie, what's her story?" Jason raised an eyebrow like I'd just revealed a government secret. "Oh? We're officially asking questions now?" I tried not to smile. "Just curious." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Well, she's been single for a while. Had a serious relationship a couple years ago, Didn't end great, but she's in a good place now. She works with Rachel's sister, actually. Graphic design stuff. Loves cheesy 90s rom-coms, hates pickles with a passion, and once cried during a documentary about jellyfish. I blinked. That's oddly specific. Jason grinned. I pay attention. Plus, she's my friend, man. We all look out for each other. The next time I saw Rachel, I tried my luck again. We were sitting on the porch steps during another group hang, watching as someone attempted to light the barbecue with more enthusiasm than skill. She seems like someone who doesn't take things too seriously, I said, keeping it casual. Rachel smirked. She's careful, not closed off, just thoughtful. She doesn't let people in too easily. That makes sense. Rachel nudged me with her elbow. But I've never seen her laugh the way she does when she's with you. That means something. There was something about getting information this way that made everything feel more personal. It wasn't about scrolling through a profile and making assumptions. It was about hearing real stories from people who knew her, people who loved her in their own platonic, protective ways. It made me appreciate her even more. Of course, I wasn't the only one asking questions. One night I showed up early to a small get-together at David's place. Natalie wasn't there yet. I was helping set up when I overheard Rachel talking to David in the hallway, not knowing I was nearby. He asked about her? Rachel said, half whispering. Yeah, David replied. And she asked about him. Last week. Wanted to know if he was seeing anyone. She tried to sound chill, but you could tell she wanted the real answer. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, holding a stack of plastic cups, letting their words settle into me like sunlight through a window. She had asked about me. Later that night, when she finally arrived, her hair was still damp from a rushed shower, and she was wearing an oversized hoodie that probably wasn't hers. She spotted me and smiled like she always did, but this time there was something else behind it. A knowing, a quiet awareness that maybe we weren't the only ones tuning into whatever this was. During the party, I found myself next to her on the couch. We were watching the group argue over which movie to put on. She leaned toward me slightly, her voice low. You ever notice how nobody here knows how to make decisions unless it involves food? I laughed. I think they just like arguing more than actually watching anything. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. What do you think of 10 Things I Hate About You? It's one of my favorites. I raised an eyebrow, recalling what Jason had said. Cheesy 90s rom-coms? Her eyes narrowed playfully. Who told you that? Lucky guess. She didn't press it, but I could tell she knew I'd done some asking. Instead of calling me out, she just smiled to herself, like she liked that I cared enough to find out. In the days that followed, the intel gathering continued, quietly, respectfully, through friends, not feeds. I learned she volunteered at an animal shelter twice a month, that she had a weird talent for remembering license plates, that she used to collect postcards but stopped after she lost a box of them during a move, that her laugh changed slightly when she was really tired. It got softer, almost sleepy, like the kind of laugh you'd only hear at 2 a.m. It wasn't just about collecting facts. It was about understanding the little things, the stories behind her preferences, the reasons behind her quiet moments. And maybe, just maybe, she was doing the same thing. I caught her one evening talking to Jason while I was across the room, pretending to be interested in a conversation about fantasy football. She kept glancing over at me, and every time I looked her way, she looked away just a second too late. That's when I knew she wasn't just casually observing anymore. She was curious, the same way I was, quietly gathering pieces of my story from the people who knew me best. That's how things worked back then. We didn't rely on algorithmic timelines or dating bios. We built the picture slowly, through the words of others, through shared spaces and overlapping stories, through real gossip, the kind that comes from care, not clicks. And you know what? It made everything feel more alive, more intentional, because every detail I learned was a gift, passed along with context, not a snapshot. Every little fact felt like another thread tying me closer to her world. By the time we finally ended up alone again, just the two of us, sitting on a bench after everyone else had gone home, we didn't need to say much. There was already so much that had been said without ever being spoken directly. She looked at me, her fingers brushing the edge of the bench. "So," she said, "you like root beer, hate pickles, and have a secret playlist of sad indie songs you only listen to on cloudy days. Am I close?" I blinked, laughing. "Wow, you've been doing some recon." She smiled. "Real gossip." "Only. No stalking." I looked at her then, really looked, and felt a wave of something simple but strong. Connection. Not built overnight, not built through screens, but built the old way. Through people, through patience, through curiosity. And, in that moment I knew, we were slowly becoming something real. After that night on the bench, everything felt different. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but deeply shifted. It was the kind of difference you feel in your chest before you even understand it with words. And yet, even with that new warmth between us, neither of us texted. Not the next morning. Not the day after. It wasn't that I didn't want to. Believe me, I had my phone in my hand more times than I could count. I even typed something a few times. A simple, "had fun last night," or a casual, "you left your hoodie behind, I think." But each time I erased it. There was something about holding back that felt right, like we were letting the connection breathe. It wasn't about playing games or trying to seem cool. It was about that rare kind of anticipation that only exists when you don't fill the space with digital noise. I missed her presence, her actual physical presence, her voice in a room, her way of pausing right before delivering a joke, the little way her eyes darted when she was trying not to laugh. So instead of texting, I waited. Not passively. Not like someone hoping to win a prize. I waited like someone who knew that bumping into her again wouldn't just be a coincidence. It would be a moment worth something. Something real, and with every day that passed, that waiting turned into a low hum beneath everything I did. I went to the usual spots more than usual. Rachel's place, the cafe near campus, even the bookstore that always smelled like old paper and cinnamon tea, where I once overheard Natalie say she found comfort in its messy, magical chaos. I wasn't chasing. I was simply making myself open to possibility. And when it finally happened, it was like winning a silent bet I'd placed with myself. I was at the Saturday farmers market, walking past rows of flowers and handmade soap, and baskets of ripe strawberries when I saw her. She was bent over a crate of peaches, her hair tied back in a low bun, wearing a loose flannel shirt and jean shorts. She looked like summer itself, casual, warm, and unbothered by time. She didn't see me right away, which gave me a second to breathe in the moment, to appreciate that this was how we met again, not through a ping on a screen, but under a blue sky surrounded by the scent of herbs and bread and fruit. Then she looked up, spotted me, and smiled like she had been hoping for this too. "Hey," she said, as if we'd just seen each other an hour ago. "Hey," I replied, trying not to grin too hard. We walked together through the market without saying much at first. We didn't need to. The silence between us felt like an extension of that pause, the unspoken understanding that neither of us had rushed to text, because part of the beauty of all this was in the waiting. "You didn't text," she said eventually, glancing at me as she held a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand. "I didn't," I admitted. "You didn't either." She smiled. "I wanted to. A lot." "Same." There was a small beat of quiet again before she added, "But I kinda like not knowing when I'd see you next. It made this, I don't know, feel more real somehow." I nodded. "Like bumping into magic instead of summoning it." She laughed softly. "Exactly." We ended up sitting on the grass just outside the market, 2 iced teas between us and the wildflowers laid carefully on the blanket she had in her bag. People passed by, families with toddlers, old couples holding hands, musicians setting, up by the fountain. But in that little bubble, it felt like the world had quieted just enough for us to hear each other clearly. "You know what I kept thinking?" she said, her gaze drifting toward the sky. "What?" that you don't really get to miss someone if you never give yourself space to miss them. I looked at her then, the late morning sun catching the golden edges of her eyes. So you missed me? She smiled without answering directly. But the way she leaned just slightly closer, the way her fingers grazed mine on the blanket, said everything. The next time we saw each other, it was at Rachel's birthday dinner. This time, we didn't pretend to be surprised. We didn't tiptoe around it. We just smiled in that quiet, almost secret way, like two people who had already decided, without needing to say it out loud, that whatever this was, it was growing. And worth growing slowly. Our friends noticed. Of course they did. Still no texts? Jason whispered to me during dessert, nudging my arm. Still none, I replied. He looked impressed. Old school. I respect it. But it wasn't about being retro or charming. It was about the rhythm we were creating. It was about trusting that we'd see each other again, and again, without needing to manufacture it through messages and emojis. Each encounter carried more weight because it wasn't scheduled. It was chosen, by time, by space, by whatever. Invisible thread had started pulling us closer. Eventually, yes, we did start texting, but even then, it was never constant. We saved the best of ourselves for in-person moments. The laughs, the small revelations, the stories about our weird childhood fears, or our favorite types of rain. There was always something more special about saying those things face to face. Weeks passed, and every time I saw her, it felt like finding something rare in a familiar place, a four-leaf clover in your backyard, a song you loved on the radio when you weren't even looking for it. And sometimes, late at night, I'd still pick up my phone and think about sending her something. A thought, a memory, a line from a book she once mentioned. But then I'd put it down again, smiling, because I knew I'd see her soon. And when I did, it would mean more. There's something so wonderfully terrifying about the first time you try to call someone you like. Not message, not react to a story, but call. A real voice-to-voice moment, where every pause matters, where silence can either kill the mood or somehow make it sweeter. Back then, it wasn't even my phone. Rachel's living room still had this slightly cracked beige landline mounted on the wall near the kitchen, with a long spiraled cord that looked like it had lived through generations. I was crashing at her, place for the weekend, and while we were all lounging around, talking about nothing and everything, Natalie's name came up, not by accident, but not on purpose either. She said she might swing by later, Rachel mentioned casually, then glanced at me with the smallest smirk. Should I tell her you'll be here? I shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. Only if you want. Rachel raised a knowing eyebrow. Or you could just call her. I laughed. Call her? Like, with a phone call? Yeah, she said, gesturing dramatically to the old landline. Go full vintage. Go bold. It was a joke, but not really. Part of me wanted to. Not just because I missed hearing her voice, but because calling felt like such a deliberate move. Riskier, more vulnerable. It was different than waiting to bump into her again. It was me stepping out of the quiet comfort of coincidence and choosing her directly. I hesitated. I asked Rachel if she had Natalie's number. She did. Of course she did. She handed it over, written in the Notes app of her phone, and I stared at it for a good few seconds before copying it onto a napkin, like it would feel more real that way. Then I stared at the napkin. Are you seriously overthinking this? Jason called out from the couch without even looking up. Very seriously, I replied. The others laughed. They went back to their conversations, and Rachel stepped into the kitchen to make popcorn. The room hummed with low voices and music from a Bluetooth speaker, but in my little corner by the landline, it all faded into static. I picked up the phone, fingers slightly trembling, dialed each digit carefully like they were codes to a secret door. Then came the ringing. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. I almost hung up on the 5th, just before it connected. Hello? A voice answered, but it wasn't hers. Panic. I cleared my throat. Hi, is Natalie there? There was a pause, then a rustling sound. Then finally, her voice. "This is Natalie." For a second, I forgot everything I had rehearsed. I had practiced lines in my head for nearly half an hour, but hearing her voice knocked all the logic out of me. There was only warmth, curiosity, and something light in her tone, as if she already knew it was me, or maybe hoped it was. "Hey, it's me. I'm at Rachel's," I said awkwardly. She laughed gently. "I figured." Caller ID said Rachel's number. Of course it did. This wasn't the 90s. We both laughed, and suddenly the tension broke. "So, I wasn't sure if you were still thinking of coming by tonight," I said, trying to keep it casual. "But I thought I'd check in, old school style." She paused, and I could almost hear her smiling. "You called? On purpose?" "Yeah, I love that." Those 3 words made the risk worth it. We talked for a while, and it felt like the kind of call you didn't want to end, even though nothing groundbreaking was said. We talked about the sky outside, which for some reason we both noticed had the same deep purplish hue. We talked about the playlist Rachel always used for background music. We joked about our friends' weird snack choices. There was something deeply tender about hearing someone's voice without distraction. No visuals, no filters. Just the sound of breath, laughter, and silence stretched gently between phrases. There were moments where neither of us spoke, and they didn't feel awkward. They felt suspended, like soft bridges between thoughts. Eventually she said, "I was going to come later, but now I kind of want to be there now." And 30 minutes later, she was. When she walked into the apartment, she looked at me first, and I looked at her. And no one else existed for a few seconds. It was like the call had started a quiet thread that kept tugging us toward each other, even in a room full of noise and motion. "You have a nice phone voice," she whispered, when we ended up on the balcony together, 2 drinks in hand. I laughed. "You're just saying that because I risked the horror of someone else answering first." "That's exactly why I'm saying it," she teased. Then her tone softened. "It meant something." I nodded. "Yeah, it did to me too." And maybe that was the thing. Making that call wasn't just about hearing her voice. It was about showing up differently. It was about letting her know that I was done waiting for chance meetings, done relying on friends to connect the dots for us. It was the first time I actively reached out, even if I used someone else's phone to do it. We didn't talk about the call again after that night, but its effect lingered. Our dynamic shifted. Not drastically, but subtly. We started making plans more intentionally. Still not daily texts, but little gestures that showed we were both thinking about each other. Sharing favorite songs, dropping off a coffee, leaving a note in a book I returned to her, and always, always preserving the magic of timing. The balance between being patient and being bold. Looking back, I think that call marked the beginning of a different kind of closeness. One where we stopped orbiting and started gravitating, gently but unmistakably. Where everything was still slow but not hesitant. Where every choice, no matter how small, said, "I'm here. I want this. I want you." And somehow, using that scratchy old landline made it feel all the more unforgettable. There's a strange kind of beauty in not knowing, not being able to scroll through someone's feed, not seeing stories or posts that hint at what they're feeling, wearing, thinking, or doing. Back then, after our call and that late night, on Rachel's balcony, there was nothing left for me to check. No profile updates, no hidden clues in a caption, no breadcrumb trails to follow until the next time we crossed paths. I only had what we shared that night. Her voice, her laugh, the way she looked at me before stepping out into the night air, and it had to be enough. I remember the quiet hum of waiting. It wasn't passive, but it wasn't active either. I wasn't pacing, I wasn't planning, I wasn't pretending to be indifferent. I was just remembering, replaying small details in my head like a favorite song you hum under your breath without realizing it. I remembered how she had tucked her hair behind her ear when she spoke about her favorite movie, how her eyes wandered upward when she was unsure of something, as if the ceiling might offer a clue. I remembered her sneakers, the ones with the tiny red stripe near the sole, and how she tapped them lightly against the metal of the balcony rail when she was thinking. and I remembered the feeling, the unmistakable ease between us, like a current you don't have to name to know you're both inside it. But when the weekend ended and everyone went back to their routines, the silence crept in. Not a cold silence, but one filled with curiosity. Where was she now? Did she think about me the way I thought about her? Had our connection stuck with her, or had it evaporated into the fog of group laughs and shared playlists? There was no way to check the vibes. No digital breadcrumbs, no likes to dissect, no late-night story reposts to read into. We were in the blank space between encounters, and all I had was the last imprint of our energy together. So I held on to it. Caught myself wondering if I'd see her that week. Wondering if she'd go to the same open mic night she mentioned offhandedly. Wondering if she'd text Rachel and ask who was coming to Friday's rooftop dinner. I didn't want to ask directly. I didn't want to chase. But I couldn't help hoping. Jason noticed it before anyone else. We were in line at a coffee shop 2 days later when he said, "You've got that face." "What face?" I asked, though I already knew. "That one where you're trying not to think about someone, but it's failing miserably." I laughed. "I'm not trying not to think. I'm just waiting." "For what?" "For her to show up again." He smiled knowingly. "You're old school, apparently." But it wasn't just about being old school. It was about preserving something that felt unfiltered. I didn't want the digital version of her. I didn't want to accidentally stumble on a picture that left me second-guessing, or a status that made me feel left out. I wanted the real version. The one I got to know in real time, under real light, with no edits or angles. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned, and that made it better. It was Wednesday evening, the air warm with the kind of stillness that hangs before summer thunderstorms. I was walking through the park near downtown, earbuds in, but music paused, lost in my own head. And there she was, on a bench under the big elm tree, flipping through a paperback book. She didn't see me at first. I stopped, hesitated. Then she looked up and smiled like she'd been waiting too. "You again?" she said, her voice lighter than the air between us. "Me again," I replied, sitting beside her. There was no awkward build-up. No small talk needed to bridge the gap. We just picked up where we left off, and all the wondering, all the silence, all the inability to check her vibe. It made this moment land differently. It made it feel earned. I wasn't sure when I'd see you again, I admitted. "Me neither," she said. "But I hoped it would happen like this." We talked for over an hour, about everything and nothing. The kind of wandering conversation where the words don't really matter as much as the pauses and the rhythm and the way someone says your name like they've said it 100 times before. And later, when she got up to leave, she didn't say goodbye like it was final. She just said, "I'll see you." That night, I realized how much presence matters. How, without all the digital interference, we're left with something more honest. The memory of connection, the glance, the tone, the way someone made you feel. That's what you carry with you into the waiting. And when the next moment comes, when you see them again in the wild, it doesn't feel like catching up. It feels like continuity, like the conversation never really stopped, like it's been breathing quietly, somewhere beneath your ribs, waiting to be spoken again. In a world where everything is so fast, so immediate, so shareable, maybe what made her feel different was this slow unfolding. This sacred silence between moments. This inability to know everything ahead of time. Maybe the charm was in not knowing if she'd still feel the same, and then finding out gently that she did. The message came through Rachel like a casual breeze that ended up stirring everything inside me. "Hey, just a heads up, she's going to be at Liv's party on Friday." That was all it took. One line. One soft drop of information, and suddenly everything felt electric. My chest tightened with anticipation. My mind kicked into gear, and the butterflies that had been dormant since the park suddenly remembered how to fly. I stared at my phone for a moment after reading it, trying not to overreact, trying not to overthink, and completely failing at both. She would be there, at the same party, in the same room, with all that unsaid possibility hanging quietly between us, like a curtain waiting to be lifted. And I knew what this meant. Not just a chance to see her again, but a chance to make something move forward, even if just a step. By Thursday afternoon, I was already planning. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, not because I wanted to impress her, with a look that screamed I was trying, but because I wanted to get it just right. Like a tone of voice you hope lands perfectly. Something that said I cared but wasn't consumed. Something that showed I'd thought about it but wasn't desperate. I ended up choosing a dark blue shirt she'd complimented once. Not directly, but I remembered her saying, "Blue suits you," when I wore something similar that night on the balcony. And then came the mental rehearsal. What would I say first? Would it be casual? A joke? Should I wait for a quiet moment or approach her as soon as I saw her? Should I act surprised to see her? Or let her know I'd been hoping for it too? It sounds silly now, but back then, those small decisions felt monumental. Like I was threading a needle between confidence and vulnerability, trying not to come undone in the process. Friday arrived, slow and deliberate, like the world knew I was waiting for it. The hours dragged at work, every task a distraction I couldn't fully focus on. I kept checking the time, the weather, my phone. Nothing meaningful, just signs that the night was getting closer. And when the sun began to set and I stepped into the cool air of the early evening, I felt it, that quiet humming tension of what might be. Liv's place was already buzzing when I arrived. The music spilled out from the speakers, lights hung in soft clusters above the backyard, and the familiar scent of something grilled drifted through the air. People laughed, greeted, moved through each other like pieces of a shared rhythm. I spotted a few friends, exchanged hugs and short catch-ups, but I wasn't really listening. I was scanning the room, not frantically, not obviously, but enough to feel it in my bones. And then I saw her. She was standing near the table with the drinks, talking to someone I didn't recognize, a solo cup in one hand and her free hand gesturing mid-story. Her hair was different, slightly curled, more volume, and she wore something light, flowing, like the wind had chosen her as its favorite. The moment I saw her, all that preparation collapsed into pure feeling. The butterflies weren't quiet anymore. They were fully awake, fluttering wildly in my stomach, reminding me I was alive. She hadn't seen me yet, and that gave me a moment to breathe, to take it all in. I didn't approach right away. I wandered, said hello to more people, laughed at something I barely heard, all while keeping her in the corner of my eye. I waited for the moment to feel right, not forced, not orchestrated, just aligned. And eventually, it came. She turned, caught my gaze across the crowd, and smiled. Not a big, performative grin, but the kind of smile that says, "There you are." I walked over slowly, careful not to seem too eager. She didn't move, just waited for me to reach her. And when I did, we stood there in that quiet tension for a second too long before either of us spoke. "You clean up well," she said, eyes glancing at the shirt. "So do you," I replied, letting my smile show a little more this time. She looked down, almost shyly, and then lifted her eyes again with that familiar glint. "I was hoping you'd come. I was hoping you'd be here," I said, and it was true. Not just something to say, but something I'd felt all week without knowing how to name it. The rest of the night unfolded like a soft melody. We didn't cling to each other, didn't isolate ourselves from the group, but we found our way to the same corners, the same jokes, the same laughter. Our conversations were stitched between interactions with others, yet somehow, they always felt private. Like even in the middle of a crowd, we were on our own wavelength. At one point, she brushed against me while reaching for a bottle on the table, and our hands touched briefly. That single contact sent a spark straight through me. She looked up, smiled again, and for a split second, the noise around us disappeared. Later, when most people had left and the music had softened into background ambiance, we found ourselves sitting on the edge of the porch steps, shoulder to shoulder, not saying much. "Was it a good night?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "It was. You made it better." Same, I said. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't have a dramatic confession or a slow dance under the stars. But something shifted. We both knew it. A mutual acknowledgement that whatever this was, it wasn't just a phase of mild curiosity. It was building slowly and with care, like a song that saves its chorus until you're ready for it. The butterflies never really went away. They just learned how to fly in formation. The morning after the party felt like waking up from a dream you didn't want to end. My clothes still smelled faintly of grilled food and perfume, the kind that lingers like a soft echo of a moment that mattered. I replayed everything in my mind. Her glance across the yard, the way her laughter folded into mine, the porch steps beneath us and the quiet that didn't need filling. But most of all, I remembered how we said goodbye. It was almost nothing, but somehow everything. We hadn't planned to exchange numbers. The night didn't push us in that direction. It unfolded organically, softly, like we were savoring the process instead of rushing toward a goal. But as she stood up to leave, brushing invisible lint from her dress and tucking a curl behind her ear, something in the air shifted, that tender awareness that the night was ending, and the thread connecting us needed to be secured before it unraveled. She looked at me for a beat too long, and I took a breath. "Hey, before you go, maybe I could..." She reached into her small bag before I could finish. "I was hoping you'd ask." She pulled out a pen, a thin, half-dried thing with faded ink and no paper in sight. I searched my pockets. Nothing but a folded receipt from the sandwich shop near my work and an old gum wrapper. "Don't laugh," I said, holding them out. She laughed anyway. "Give me the receipt." She leaned on the porch railing, trying to find a solid surface to write on. I watched the concentration on her face as she scribbled her number with gentle pressure, the pen hesitating against the glossy paper. Her fingers were small and deliberate, her handwriting loopy and soft, numbers that seemed to dance rather than sit still. When she handed it to me, it felt heavier than it should have. That crumpled slip of paper held possibility. It wasn't just digits. It was a sign that she wanted to be found. I looked at it like it was a fragile relic. "I swear I'm going to guard this with my life." "You better," she said, half joking, half serious. I folded it once more, tighter now, and slid it into my wallet. Not the inner pocket where I keep receipts I never look at again, but the front one, where only important things go. It stayed there, warm against the leather, like it knew how badly I didn't want to lose it. After she left, I stayed a little longer, not because I had anywhere better to be, but because I didn't want the air to shift just yet. I wanted to hold on to the night a little more. I looked around the yard, empty cups, string lights, forgotten shoes near the fence, and all of it felt touched by her presence. Later that afternoon back home, I opened my wallet again just to make sure the receipt was still there. I read the number slowly, imagining her voice reading it out loud, and then quickly wrote it again in my notebook, the one I used for half thoughts and lyrics I never finished, just in case. Then again on a sticky note that I hid inside my desk drawer, and then once more on the inside cover of a book I knew I'd never lend to anyone. Maybe it was overkill, but in those days, before cloud backups and synced contact lists, losing a number meant losing everything, and I couldn't let that happen. I even considered texting her right away, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more respect for the moment. Like I didn't want to chase it too fast, didn't want to flatten the magic by turning it into something transactional. She had trusted me with that number. She'd smiled when she gave it, and I wanted to honor that. The next day, I almost reached for my phone a dozen times, but instead, I waited. Not to play games, not to pretend I was too cool or too busy, but to give space for something real to breathe. I wanted the next time we spoke to matter, so I carried that little receipt with me, everywhere. Even when I left my wallet at home, I tucked it into my coat pocket. I checked it sometimes, not because I forgot the number, but because seeing her handwriting reminded me it was real, that the moment had happened, that she existed outside my imagination. One night, when the city was quiet and my room was lit only by the glow of my bedside lamp, I lay on my bed and held that receipt in my hands. I traced the ink with my thumb, smiling to myself like a fool. It felt so fragile, so analog, and yet so sacred. It was the kind of artifact love stories are built on. Not digital, not saved in some cloud, just paper, ink, memory. And I wondered, was she doing the same? Had she written down my number too? Did she keep it tucked in a book or hidden in her wallet, peeking at it when no one was watching? Did she rehearse what she'd say when we talked again? Because I was. I had whole conversations in my head already. Little scripts of what I might say, how I might sound cool but not try hard, how I might ask her to go somewhere quiet, just us, this time. The receipt eventually faded. The ink wore thin, and the paper creased until the corners frayed. But I never threw it away, not even after I saved her number in my phone. Not even after our first real call. That little square of glossy proof lived in my drawer for years, long after the world moved on to touch screens and saved favorites, because that's how it was back then. You didn't scroll a feed to remember someone. You didn't refresh a profile to feel connected. You held on to the scraps, the paper, the pen, the look in their eye as they handed you a piece of themselves and trusted you not to let it get lost. And I didn't. The first call wasn't perfect. It started with silence and a few awkward laughs, the kind that live between hello and so. How was your day? I was pacing in my room, trying not to sound like I had rehearsed the conversation a dozen times in my head. I hadn't planned to call right then. It just felt like the moment had finally ripened. And when she answered with a soft, "Hey you," I knew I had waited just enough. We didn't talk for hours. Not that night. It was just long enough to hear her voice without background noise, to let her hear the rhythm of mine without the distractions of a party or a group hangout. She told me she was eating cereal at 9 p.m., said she always liked breakfast at night. I told her I thought that was brilliant. We laughed at the tiny things. The ordinary suddenly felt personal. And then we hung up, both of us pretending we were calm, both of us probably grinning in the dark. From there, things moved, but not fast. We weren't texting all day. We weren't posting cryptic quotes on stories or sharing playlists on apps. We were just getting to know each other the old way, slowly, gently, like two people walking toward each other on a quiet street, unsure of how close to stand, but knowing they don't want to walk past. Some days we didn't talk, and that was okay. I didn't panic when a few days went by without a word. I didn't interpret the silence as distance. It just meant life was happening, and that our connection wasn't dependent on constant validation. When we did speak, it felt like turning a page in a good book, the kind you don't want to rush, because you already know you'll miss it when it's over. I began to learn the small things. The way she tapped her nails when she was thinking. The way she used metaphors in conversation, like her thoughts, came out in poetry without her trying. I noticed how she laughed more with her eyes than with her mouth, and how she sometimes paused before answering, like she wanted to give me her full attention. There was no checklist. No forced deep talks just to speed things along. We didn't feel the pressure to label anything. We met up at places that didn't try too hard to be romantic. Coffee shops where the furniture didn't match, bookstores that smelled like dust and paper, late night walks with no destination except the one unfolding between us. And yet the connection deepened. Not because we tried to deepen it, but because we didn't try to resist it. She once told me that she liked how we weren't in a hurry, that it felt like we were planting something rather than buying it fully grown, that there was beauty in the wait. I nodded, pretending I hadn't already thought the exact same thing. There was something sacred about discovering each other in real time, about not having a timeline to meet, about letting the space between us teach us patience and presence. We weren't swiping, we weren't strategizing, we were just showing up. Some nights we'd talk on the phone, both lying on our beds in the dark, letting our words float and land without urgency. We talked about music that made us cry, about childhood fears and how they still lived inside us. We asked questions we didn't need to answer right away. Sometimes silence sat between us, soft and unthreatening, like a friend who didn't need to fill the air. It was in that quiet unfolding that I started to notice how much I looked forward to her voice. Not because it gave me butterflies anymore, but because it gave me peace. There was a stillness in her presence that made me feel more myself. And somehow that felt more romantic than anything dramatic ever could. Our friends started to notice, not because we were overly affectionate or obvious, but because there was a new rhythm to our being around each other. A shared look across the room, a small laugh before either of us said a word. They teased us sometimes, just date already, but we didn't bite. We were on our own pace, and we liked it that way. The first time I held her hand, it wasn't during a grand gesture. We were waiting at a bus stop, both a little tired, both a little quiet. I reached out without thinking, and she laced her fingers through mine without a word. It was so gentle, so matter-of-fact, like we had been doing it for years. The moment was simple, but it held everything. We didn't rush toward the next step. There was no checklist, no performative milestone we had to hit. Each time we met, it was enough to just be near, to sit next to each other at a friend's barbecue, to share headphones on a train, to walk home in the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. There was one evening in particular that lives in my memory like a photograph. We were sitting on the roof of a friend's building, watching the city change colors as the sun slipped behind the skyline. I looked over at her, her face golden in the fading light, and I remember thinking, if this never becomes anything more than this moment, I'd still be lucky. But we did grow, not overnight, not because we had to, but because something about the way we treated each other made space for something lasting. We built something that wasn't loud, but it was steady. Something that didn't announce itself with fireworks, but stayed lit like a candle in a quiet room. Eventually, we did become more. But even then, it wasn't a big revelation. It was just a continuation. Like the next chapter of a book we were already reading together. We looked at each other one day and realized we were already there. And maybe that's the magic of it. There were no confessions shouted under the rain, no sweeping declarations with music swelling in the background. Just two people discovering each other slowly, honestly, with room to breathe. No pressure, no likes, just moments, just us.